first order of business is, as the mayor has talked about, is that the city of Odessa, the department heads, and me, and I helped put this together, is that we put a 10-year capital plan together. The capital plan prioritizes short-range and long-range goals for the city in the form of projects. The short-range projects are needed to meet statutory or regulatory requirements. That comes from either the EPA, the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. That's where we get our marching orders as far as what we have to do for specific issues such as in the wastewater and the water treatment facilities. And these are projects that are also needed to ensure continued provision of the services that you now get. In order to maintain the requirements and also make sure that you're getting clean drinking water and make sure that when you flush the toilet, things go away. Those are the short-range goals. The long-range goals are projects that address future needs of the city. Again, this is just part of looking forward, taking a hard look of where the city needs to go and what we want to do for the city, what amenities that we want to have, and different things like that. This also allows for the expansion of services. We grew, I think, about 500, if I remember right, from 2000 to 2010. And the expectations are that we will continue to grow, maybe at a faster rate in the next 10 years, and we need to be prepared for that and plan for future expansion of services. And this also, the long-range goals also looks at future statutory and regulatory issues. One thing I will jump in here is that a lot of what the water and wastewater work under, the rules and the regulations, that is set forth by the Clean Water Act that has been passed by it's a federal law. And part of that is that every 3 years that is reevaluated. And so that means every 3 years it gets a little more stringent. That they make the rules and the testing and different requirements for the level of clean water, that gets a little more stringent every 3 years as it moves forward. That is something that sometimes we have to keep in mind, is that we cannot just build a wastewater treatment plant or water treatment plant today and expect it to last 10, 15 years. We will always need to be putting money back into that in order to meet the statutory and regulatory requirements that these regulatory agencies have. That is something that just as it continues to go forward. And so we're trying to anticipate that with some of the long-range goals. Page 2, planning continued. We do have an aging water and wastewater infrastructure. A lot of what we have is about 70 years old, some obviously newer. And some of the oldest is estimated at about 80 years old or just a little older than that. So this is something that a lot of times we just put in the ground. We don't always think about it, kind of out of sight, out of mind, and we don't always think about it. But that is something that those things don't last forever. Recent additions to the system need to be kept in compliance with increasing water quality standards. This would be the new water treatment plant that was just built a few years back, the water tower, and also the wastewater treatment plant that was just built a few years back. At the time when these things were built, they were state-of-the-art. They were meeting all the requirements. But as I just kind of explained, within 3 years, they can be out of compliance. Just by a stroke of a pen, that new rules come in and that we're behind the 8 ball again to get caught up. And those things need to be addressed as we move forward. Non-compliance consequences, as you know, a lot of those things, these regulations, they have pretty stiff penalties. One of the things is for no construction within the community. And I'll give you an example. Right now, if the city of Odessa wanted to be seriously looking at a new hotel or motel to come into the community, that would be a challenge because DNR has placed Department of Natural Resources at the state level has placed some restrictions on us that we cannot add to our system until we get some new things, get some issues resolved with our wastewater treatment facilities. So obviously we see the economic impact of that we could have a new business come in, new revenue for property taxes come in, but we would be unable to do that right now because of these restrictions that the Department of Natural Resources has placed on us. And that's pretty serious if we want to grow. Also fines, I've heard fines ranging from cities that have kind of to a point of being insolent to the Department of Natural Resources and to the EPA that no, we're not going to comply with this. Then they start getting fines that are like $10,000 a day as long as they are out of compliance. We certainly cannot afford something like that, and we want to remain on their good side as we kind of move forward. The other thing is lawsuits. There are plenty of environmental interest groups out there, and they do not take us to a court very often. What they will do is they will take the EPA to court, and the EPA will turn around because they're not making us comply with the regulations. So the EPA will turn around and make sure the DNR is making us comply with the regulations. And again, it's a whole cycle of fines and other things. And we definitely need to avoid some of that type of problems. Page 3, planning and projects. If you were here at the last meeting, I will say that this number is just a little different. I think I had it down as about 6.1 million in capital projects. That was an error on my part. It was two parts. It was that I didn't read my numbers as well as I should have. The second thing is that one particular project, this is just to give an example of how expensive sometimes this stuff can be. One estimate of a project was given at about $100,000. And that was the cleaning and maintenance and repair of the water tower. And that, after Paul did some work, had the folks come out, take a look at it, and give us an estimate, we were off by $150,000. This project will end up costing us about $250,000 when initial estimates were about $100,000. That doesn't have anything to do with the knowledge base. It has more to do with just that as these requirements keep creeping up and creeping up, these businesses are having to do more and more to help us maintain our system. The primary goal of the projects that are listed out in the Water Enterprise Fund is to rehabilitate and maintain current infrastructure, things that we aren't doing. We need to maintain them, keep them in working order, and then also do some rehabilitation, like I said, the water tower, to make sure that it will last as long as possible for us and remain in good working order. We need to do some work on that. And there's other little things that go along with that, things that might have worked, been okay 3 years ago are no longer okay. And an example of that is the antenna that is for the water tower. Before, the way the wire ran up the side was put in a certain place. OSHA came along and changed that. We cannot have that where we have that wire any longer. So we have to change that. It's little things like that that just burn us sometimes when it just costs dollars and cents that we have to address to remain in compliance. Second thing is secondary goals, prepare the city to meet the future needs of the city. As we move forward, what the city is going to need if it grows, if it continues to expand, if our city limits expand and take on different areas and annex different areas of the city. The wastewater projects is about $17.9 million. It is the biggest chunk of change out of all the projects. One thing I will say is that we get this a lot in City Hall. People sometimes coming in and asking, how is my wastewater so expensive? How is it that it is so expensive? It's very, very simple. To get this from the well water, to get this to this point of drinkability, Doesn't take much. It goes through some filters. It does some different. It goes through some different processes up there at the plant. 4 or 5 processes, and it's good to drink. Not very much at all. But then to take wastewater, sewer water, and if you've ever had the unfortunate experience of having sewer water back up into your home or something like that, you see how black it is and all the junk that goes with it. EPA is getting us to a point that want to get all water coming out of it just about to this level. Not quite drinkable, but pretty close. And that takes several processes, several steps for us to get that. And every time we add a step into the process to get that water to the point of, they want it so that a person could get into it and not pick up communicable disease. Basically, they want to get the water swimmable as it comes out of our wastewater treatment plant. To get it to that point, several processes. And every time we add process, that makes it more and more expensive. So instead of 5 steps to get water from our wells to drinkable, it might take 15 or 20 steps through a wastewater treatment plant to get the water to a point that it meets EPA and Department of Natural Resources regulations. But again, the focus on our wastewater projects, it's about $17.9 million. We have several projects that are underway at this time. The mayor's talked about 53,000 feet of sewer lines that were inspected. That is running a camera down through them to find out where the cracks are, where water is coming in, infiltrating into the system, and then finding other areas of blockages and things like that, figure out what we're going to do. And also future needs, to look at, again, future expansion of the city, where we are going to grow, and to take advantage of that. And if we do grow, we're going to need more of a capability. We're going to need a bigger system and expand the system a little bit. Primary goal right now is to rehabilitate and maintain again. Secondary goal is to prepare the city to meet the future needs of the community. Planning and projects total is about $24.7 million, $6.8 million for water, $17.9 million for wastewater. And these projects cover all the identified needs at this time. Planned projects for future regulatory requirements and also the future needs of the city.
John, I think you'll point out that these needs are projected out over the next 10 years.
Right. That's one thing I will say. Thank you, Jack. That a lot of these things, the bulk of them are over the next 10 years. It's not something that, there's some big projects that we need to do within the next 2 to 3 years, but there's a lot that are stretched out over 10 years. And again, that is the short range is taking care of what we need to take care of in order to maintain our regulatory obligations to meet regulations at the Department of Natural Resources and the EPA. And the longer range is where we're looking at expansion of services or some other things that provide better services to you, the customers. The bond issue information on page 6. Make sure I didn't skip a page there. What is proposed is about a $25 million authorization. And I'll just explain authorization versus issue. Authorization is getting permission from the public to borrow the amount proposed. So we're seeking authorization from the community to borrow that much. But there is a difference between authorization and issue. Issue is when a bond or debt is issued, it is actually going ahead and borrowing part of the amount that is authorized. So we're asking for $25 million, but we may not need all of that right away. We're looking at only borrowing what we need when we need it. Initial financial analysis at this time provided by Joey McLiney has been that we can issue about $7 million of that $25 million without raising current water or wastewater rates to pay for this. And that is a direct result of the board looking into the future last year and looking at what needs that we had and taking the proactive position of that we need to make sure that we have the money coming in to pay for this, to pay for all these things that we have to get done if the city is going to remain in compliance and also the city is going to grow. One thing I will say, and I want to stress this, I can't stress this enough actually, is that the Board of Aldermen are committed to only issuing bonds as the city has the ability to pay for them. I know that I've had discussions with me about it. Sitting at a potluck a couple of weeks ago after church, I had an individual ask me about this very, very issue, is that they just wanted to make sure that if we were authorized to do that much, that where's the money coming from? And like I said, I can't stress this enough, is that the city is only, and the Board of Aldermen are committed to only getting that, using that amount of what is actually needed when revenue sources have been identified to do that. And so, again, like I said, about $7 million at this time can be issued without any increases whatsoever in rates. And one thing I will say that as we kind of move on to the next page is that we're looking at why authorize the bonds. Why are we coming back to doing the bonds instead of other ways? The state of Missouri offers offers the city two options. You can do bonds, and that is where you go to the people and get the authorization to issue the bonds. But the state of Missouri also realizes that there may be instances where the public will not vote to issue a bond. But so that puts the city back at square one. It has things it has to do, but at the same time, the voters did not allow them to do any borrowing. And when that happens, the option is to go what's called COPs, and that is certificates of participation. Is that the city, the Board of Aldermen can authorize to go into debt in order to meet the obligations, to get done whatever needs to get done, but it's very, very inefficient. And when you go through the bonding process and go take it to the people to vote, that you can get the money that is a lot better interest rates, better, what's the word I'm looking for, Joey?
Structure better marketability, better. It's the cheapest way to go, is to issue bonds.
Right.
If you use COPs, it is the most expensive, the highest interest rate, and the least efficient way to borrow.
And that is one thing that the Board of Aldermen said, you know, if we are going to borrow this kind of amount, we need to make sure that we are doing it in the most efficient way possible. We need to make sure that we're getting the best interest rates and the best structures in order to get these things done. Also, one thing is that it opens up a lot of other funding for us. The state has grant programs that we can take advantage of. But at the same time, they do not want people or cities, municipalities, to come to them with their hand out saying, we have all these problems, we need money. If they don't want that, if a municipality has not taken it upon themselves to try to take care of themselves and to work with their constituents, work with their community to try to make it on their own. They're more than willing to give us some money and give the communities money as long as they see that the community is trying to help themselves. And that's one thing that we're doing here. That by issuing bonds, by going through the bonding process, we have the ability to get grants. We also have the ability to go through the USDA Rural Development Program to get low interest loans and also some bonds there that we would not even be able to get if we weren't going through the bonding process. One thing is that one of the things that we're looking at is that the city did issue some COPs. there were some things that we had to get started on, to start working on. And that the COPs went before the Board of Aldermen last year, and it was voted to move forward on that. About $2 million was done for COPs last year. Now we're at a point where we want to we are already paying that debt back. We're starting to work on paying that debt back. And what we're wanting to do, some of the money that if the bonds are authorized by the voters, we want to convert those over into the bonds, get rid of the COPs, and if it gets us a better interest rate and a better structure to do that. We are already paying that debt at this time. This would just be changing it a little bit. So, and I just want to make sure, like I said, that I'm very, very clear on that. This isn't in addition to anything else. It would be converting the current debt that we have over into bonding debt to get better interest rates and better efficiency. And that is, like I said, and I want to stress that as well, is that the Board of Aldermen has said, you know, if we do this, we need to leverage all the funds possible in order to get grants, get low interest loans, just from wherever we need to. And bonding is the way to do that. The other thing is planning. I've gotten this question quite a bit, and I'll use an analogy. If we were going to go out, and build a house, you would not go to your bank and say, "I'm building a house. Can you give me, $10,000 for a foundation?" Then go back to the bank and say, "All right, I'm building the floor and the sheeting and the walls, and so I need lumber and stuff. I need another $10,000. Now I'm building the roof. I need another $15,000, $20,000, and get a loan for every one of those things." It has been asked of me, why, if you only need $7 million, are you asking for 25? And the analogy that I just said, it's inefficient for us to come back and put something on the ballot every time that we would need money. Little do you know that it's about $10,000 to $15,000 every time the city of Odessa puts something on the ballot. We pay the county for that service. That they take care. They put out the printing and the ballots. We put it on there. We share some costs. So it's very inefficient for us to put it on there. And it's also an approach where we're looking at the total continuity of the entire project. We're looking at this, everything that we need to do over the next 10 years. Instead of, like I said, we're building a foundation, get a loan for that, then come back for another loan for the lumber, and then come back and keep coming back. It's very inefficient and very, very expensive for us to do it that way. We have a large plan, a 10-year plan, that tells us where we need to go, what we need to accomplish, and how we need to get there. And I think that's the best start. That's the biggest comforting fact for me when I look at the amount of money that we're looking at, is that we have a very, very solid plan of what we need to do and where we need to go. At this time, I kind of thank you for your attention. I will open it up to any questions that you might have. If there's anything that I haven't covered, there is one thing I do want to cover, and I want to make sure that people kind of keep in mind, is that actually, one thing that when I was doing the copies, I found a stray page 8, and I know somehow I ended up with it. So, is rate issues. Cover this real quick. It is important to keep in mind that the utilities, the water, wastewater, and the electric are all run after a business model. That's why we refer to them as enterprise funds, and it's important to keep that in mind. One thing is, if you watch politics very much, You will always hear that we want government to run like a business. You want it to run like a business from the standpoint of you want it to be efficient, you want it to be effective, you want it to pay for itself, you don't want waste. And that is something that our utilities really strives for. The revenue that comes in is that the customer is paying for a commodity. The customers are paying, it's generating revenue to pay for the things that we're providing to them. And it is just the nature of things is that we have to look at as commodities go up over time. The dollars that it takes is going up for copper, gas prices to deliver that copper, and copper piping and all that kind of stuff. All of that goes up. All of that trickles down to us. And we have, as a business, to be responsible, need to make sure that the dollars that it costs to provide whatever service it is, whether it's wastewater, whether it's water, whether it's electric, the dollars that it costs to provide that service is that we need to make sure that that is covered by the utility rates. But that also puts a very, very important responsibility back on the Board of Aldermen to make sure that this service is being provided in the most efficient way possible, in the most effective way possible, keeping an eye on waste, keeping an eye on unneeded expenses, and making sure that none of that is part of that. And I think our board has done a very, very good job in making sure that we are running these businesses as efficiently as possible. Cost of service, that's what we're looking at. That's what you're paying for, is operations, maintenance, and also future expansion, future needs of the city, as that factors all into this. And it's important to remember that we're not a profit. This is not a profit organization. It is just, again, is that the cost that it costs for this gallon of water that I'm drinking is that I'm paying for that. Is that how much it costs to get that through the treatment facility and to my sink. That's how much it costs, and I'm paying that appropriate amount. And then again, like I said, there's a resolution that the Board of Aldermen has passed to review rates annually. They're no longer happy with just ignoring it and not think about it for a couple of years because it's not popular. But they want to be responsible, look at it on an annual basis, and make adjustments when necessary. And that being said, is that this bond issue, this is not to say that your rates won't go up. But what I can say is, if your rates go up, it will not be because of the bond issue. It will be because of the cost of operations has increased. The cost to provide this commodity has increased. But the bonds itself will not cause revenues to go up. Joey, is there anything that I've left out?
I took an email. You're pretty thorough. Does anybody remember the term shovel ready? A former presidential candidate, now president, used shovel ready. As soon as I heard that term when he was running and it looked like he was going to win, I called as many cities and schools that I knew and I said, shovel ready means bonds. You have to get them voted. And I didn't care. I said, you will need water and sewer work. Get those bonds voted. If the bonds weren't voted, they weren't shovel ready. And I don't care how many engineering plans you had. To qualify for the money that the federal government was giving away in 2008 and 2009 required bonds in place. Now, a fact is that the city can tomorrow go forward with $25 million worth of work. It would be very expensive, but they can do it. That's what John was talking about with the COP. Last year, they had to move forward with some borrowing because the government had come in and said, you will do this or we will fine you. Nobody wanted to do it. What is remarkable is that most people don't even know it took place. Basically, by restructuring your current debt and borrowing some with COPs, you guys turned around and did about $3.3 million worth of construction projects, and most people don't even know it took place last year. It was done very efficiently. Your board and your mayor basically said, we really don't have a choice. How do we move it forward? You restructured some of your outstanding debt, which opened up some reserves, so you paid cash for a great deal of it, and then you borrowed some. But we also left in place the opportunity to refinance what we borrowed if bonds are voted. So the city is asking for authorization to borrow with a bond issue. However, they have the authority to borrow. They just have they're asking you to let them do it as inexpensively as possible. And that's what shovel-ready means. The board is not going to turn around and jump and say, hey, let's issue $25 million in bonds. They're going to say, let's go look for more grants. You guys have hired a woman by the name of Freddie Wells. And I always chuckle because I said she prints money. When she walks into a room, I smile because I know there's money coming to the table. She does that. And so the city has in fact hired this woman to partner really with your bond issue. She's identified something through the USDA, which was the Rural Development, the United States Department of Agriculture. They now call it Rural Development, this division. It used to be RECD, RECT, but they didn't like that acronym. I always liked it. Now they just have it RD, Rural Development. Rural Development has a program that lets you borrow, and they give you a 40% grant. But if you don't have a bond, you don't have a 40% grant. And it may only be a 20% grant. But I sure would like to go to the table with $7 million in projects and have them turn around and say, hey, we're going to give you 3 of it. All of a sudden, everything we're talking about is doable. All of a sudden, that $25 million, we've just shrunk it. And so, as I said, the city, keep in mind, the city can borrow this money, all of it. They're not going to. They don't want to. It's the last thing they want to do. I know because I'm on the borrowing side, the lending side. I want them to borrow because that's the only time I make money. However, they're saying, no, we're doing it this way. So the USDA is one program that has up to a 40% grant. They have lots of money, or they have had lots of money. It's a presidential year, an election year. I assume they're going to keep their money, at least through November. There's also another program called the State Revolving Loan Fund. It's a federal program. It also is low interest rate borrowing. It's actually less than 2%. Now there's not grants with it, but 2% fixed for 20 years. USDA is actually closer to 3.5% fixed for 33 years. So there are dynamite programs out there, but it's up to the city. And to your mayor's credit, and to your board's credit, and to the city administrator, they've said, we've got to put our best foot forward with this bond issue. We have to ask permission from you guys. Let us do the very best we can for you. And so it's really your opportunity to say, either go for it or do a more expensive project. But everything they're planning, nothing is frivolous. Nothing is saying, oh boy, wouldn't it be nice to have gold-plated anything. What they've done is they've spent a lot of money on engineering and said, today what do we need, and what do we need over the next 10 years? They basically have bought a map. To my knowledge, it's one of the very first times in the city's history that you guys have had a direction to go if it's forced upon you. If DNR doesn't come around and say, oh, well, you've got to do this, this, and this, they're not going to jump in and say, oh, well, let's do this, this, and this. Your mayor, everybody else, everybody has to pay the higher rates. So it's going to be done as needed, as necessary, as mandated. But nobody's going to jump in and borrow more than you actually need to do at any time other than when you need it. If tomorrow the election failed, the city would be in the exact same position they are today, except they wouldn't have grants open to them, they wouldn't have low interest rate loans open to them, but they'd still be forced with the mandate from the federal government, the ever increasingly painful mandates from the federal government. Jack.
Joey, I think it'd be interesting if you explain to the people the difference between revenue bonds and general obligation bonds.
Oh, good point. In the state of Missouri, voted bonds are broken down to 2 kinds. One is a revenue bond secured by the revenues of the system, whatever the revenue of the system is. It could be the sewer system, the water system, the combined electric system. General obligation bonds is basically a lien against all of the ability of the city to tax everything. So every person that pays a property tax pays for the general obligation bond. The board chose not to go with a GO bond. They chose not to raise taxes. Basically, they're saying whoever's using the system will pay back the debt. We're not going to just levy a tax and say everybody that owns anything, including that, and your cars, personal property, real property, there is no tax increase associated with this. So those two types of bonds, revenues are secured and can be paid back through the revenues of the system. GOs may be paid back only through a property tax. And they're not talking about a GO bond, a general obligation bond. They're only talking about revenue bond. So only people that use the system pay for the system.
Oh. Because we were at a meeting, USDA, and because of the quick response of the mayor and the Board of Aldermen to put this bond issue before the voters on April 3rd, we were invited. When the USDA people heard that, we were invited to apply for another $500,000 grant that chances are we wouldn't have gotten had it not been for the board and the mayor.
And that's just
being able to say that.
Paul, I mean, that's exactly what John is talking about when we say, if the bonds are in place, if the city is moving forward with revenue bonds, things happen in our favor. It's, standing in the way of a truck called opportunity. Nobody likes the federal government mandating it, but when they do, and if you have revenue bonds in place, you get some bonuses. They do help out. If you're just going to borrow COPs, it's not shovel ready. It's not something that we will still apply for grants. We just don't have the opportunity we would if we had revenue bonds in place.
Thank you, Paul, for bringing that up. I forgot to mention that. Currently, we're waiting on word from the governor's office about a $500,000 grant that we put in for. They've had some changes in the Department of Economic Development at the state, and so we're waiting to hear back whether we've gotten that grant or not. But in the meantime, that was for the water side of it, and now we've been invited by the Department of Economic Development to put in for another $500,000 grant to be able to move forward with some other things to help with some funding with that. And again, like I said, just can't emphasize, they were very, very happy that we were being proactive towards getting this done. So that's enough from us. I know that you have some questions. If you have any, just go ahead and raise your hand. One quick note is that City of Odessa is taking a very, very serious undertaking. We are looking at the possibility of having a new logo. These have been designed by high school students in one of the high school classes. And there was about 50. We whittled them down to about 3 through the process of elimination. On your way out, take a moment, take a look, and just if you haven't done so, help us out, figure out which ones we like. The board is kind of split on these, so there's 3. I'm trying to stay out with it as much as possible. But just take a moment and write on a slip of paper on your way out and help us figure out which ones that we like.